Lloyd Alexander, American author, pioneer, and the high king of fantasy.
He was the first American who wrote high fantasy that could stand up against the British fantasy. He sort of put America on the map more solidly in the area of high fantasy.
Although it's where he would enjoy the most success over his 7-decade career, Lloyd Alexander didn't always write children's fantasy. He started his career in the 1950s writing novels for adults. However, in the early 1960s, Lloyd began writing for children and soon realized that it was through this medium that he was best able to express himself.
And this is how it turned out to be, that I found myself able to deal with things that I could never even express writing for adults. And this may seem quite surprising, that you think a book for young people, no, you can't deal with serious things. Far from it. I found I could deal with much more serious, much more profound things than I could ever do writing for grown-ups.
His first fantasy novel was the story of a cat who takes his young owner with him to his 9 lives, each taking place in a different historical setting. Lloyd planned on having one of the 9 lives take place in Wales, but as he was researching Welsh history, he came across the Mabinogion, an ancient collection of Welsh legends.
But as he began to dig into the history of Wales, especially the mythological history of Wales, he found it was so rich, and again it began to ignite his memories of being in Wales during World War II, which was for him a magical few weeks. He just thought to himself, this is far too rich and far too deep for one chapter. And so he decided to save what he had found out and actually remembered about Wales for another project.
The Chronicles of Prydain was the result. Originally planned as a trilogy, Lloyd's retelling of Welsh mythology grew to become much more. Shortly after beginning the 3rd book, Lloyd realized that another book was needed. After finishing book 3, Lloyd wrote the conclusion and sent the manuscript to his editor.
He sent me the last one, and I said, Lloyd, there's a book missing. Because the first chapter referred to Karen having this adventure and year and so on. I said, hey, you didn't write that book yet. He said, oh. So we locked that manuscript up in the bank, lest anything happen in a bank vault. And then he went to work and wrote Taran Wanderer.
The 5-book series would become Lloyd's most popular work. The Black Cauldron was a 1966 Newbery Honor Book, and the series conclusion, The High King, won the 1969 Newbery Medal.
The Newbery Medal, of course, is the most prestigious literary award for children's books and young adult books that is given. It is the oldest children's book award in the world, and therefore one of the most prestigious. And so this was a real coup, I think, and maybe coup isn't the right word, but certainly a feather in his cap that also set him up to be a recognizable, a household name in the world of children's literature from that point forward.
Lloyd Alexander continued to write children's literature for another 40 years. Over that time, his writing would influence many authors and forge the way for the next generation of American fantasy.
He established in the United States a really great foundation for the history of American fantasy and truly uniquely American fantasy and the tradition that built on other great fantasy writers that came after him, making it a part of who we are as an American culture.
It's amazing how he wrote decades ago, and yet children who may not even read him now are influenced by those who read him and keep writing. So that he's like a grandfather of children's literature, that his offspring just keeps growing and growing.
Lloyd Alexander passed away on May 17, 2007. But his influence continues to be felt. Every year, hundreds of school children visit Arlington Cemetery in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, to learn about Lloyd Alexander and to visit the final resting place of Lloyd and his wife, Janine. When he died, he had willed many of his belongings to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. A recreation of his office is housed in the Harold B. Lee Library on campus and is available for students, researchers, and fans of Alexander to come and learn more about him. And of course, his legacy will forever live on through his books.
What Lloyd's private life was is his, and it is what is in the books that counts, and that's what will survive, because I think the very best part of himself is in those books.
You can enter his writing with any book, and then you are off and running. I don't think that you can read, I don't think a child can read him without falling in love with his book and then branching out into the rest of his writing.
Lloyd used to say that he was writing adult fiction disguised as children's literature. And his primary interest was in educating his readers.
Read all of his books. Learn about him. Get to read the stories behind his books. Read the Welsh legends. Read the Indian legends. Read the people who influenced him. He was such an interesting person, and he was everything that his books are and more. And I think it's important to keep that alive.
What he did in his books, all of his books really, is tell a story, in many ways a universal story, from within about human nature. The conventions that he used, whether it was a child's story, a picture book, a novel, those were his tools for telling that story. They are great stories, they have great character and great heart, and that's what I think anyone who's looking for a good read should take some time to find out more about Lloyd Alexander.
These books have the ability to sort of get under our skin and become part of us, where there are lots of books that I read and like and enjoy that don't do that. And he somehow, by locking into these themes and making them so credible, he gets that result from the people who read them.